Before anything, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk about Tales of Kenzera here. I've been really excited about it since it was revealed, and I'm super excited to hear what you have to say about it.
Oh, no problem at all. Yeah, glad to hear you're excited about it.
Yeah, for sure. So very close to the finish line now, just a couple of weeks. How are you feeling?
Yeah, there's always a sense of nervousness with a game release when you're, know, busy away working on something in secret for so long. So I think I've been on the team nearly 4 years now. So, it's all that combination of hard work over the years and then, finally having that moment of it going out to the public and getting their hands on and getting their sort of thoughts and feelings on the game. So yeah, it's that kind of like natural nervousness, but mixed with like a lot of excitement as well. So it's glad to finally get to the finish line.
Yeah.
It's such a big achievement in of itself. So yeah, super excited for people to get the full experience now and have the full context of everything that we've been doing.
Awesome. So this is Surgent Studios' first game. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got started with the studio and how you started with the development?
Yeah, so I think it was alluded to a little bit beforehand. So yeah, I got a message from Abu, like talking a little bit about just like game development in general before I was at the studio. Just any sort of tips and guidance and stuff and everything. And we were just having, what's supposed to be a very informal sort of conversation before he pitched me. It was just like, hey, how would you like to kind of like come aboard and join? So, very on the spot sort of moment. So yeah, after giving it a lot of thought, the pitch itself for the project just really resonated with me. It's, it wasn't just it's a case of like it's not just like another job and kind of like good prospects and stuff like that. It was very much a case of the project itself being something with a huge amount of potential to work on. I found like the emotional core for it, we just had like that kind of universal theme, was very powerful. And on top of that, the Bantu mythology, just like super interesting. So there's a lot that I wasn't aware of through all the things he was telling me about the Bantu mythology with the creatures and the tales and stuff like that. So that was like hugely exciting as well, to kind of deep dive on that and start to create a new world inspired by that mythology. Was a really exciting prospect. And then, yeah, as we've said, like that being in this kind of Metroidvania game, it's just kind of like a cherry on top of the cake, really, where being a big fan of the genre, being able to have a stab at it myself and put, learn the ins and outs and then also try and put, our own spin on that. So that was, that just kind of like sealed the package really for me. So that's how I kind of got on board at the beginning. And then from there, it was all about trying to realize that vision into an actual sort of full interactive experience. Like, what was the kind of like the scope of that? What the all the specifics and the mechanics and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I remember when Tales of Kenzera was first announced, I was very surprised to find out it was a Metroidvania. Like with the first trailer, I thought, oh, a side scroller. Obviously, I love them as well, so I was super happy either way. But was
Yeah.
it always a Metroidvania, or did that kind of come about through discussion and during development?
No, so at least from the point when Abu was pitching to me, it was, yeah, very clearly a Metroidvania, which really helped to give the vision a really good kind of like solid body, really. We knew the type of thing we were trying to make. It gave us a really good target to kind of hit for. So yeah, it was always about the Metroidvania genre at that point. And as he's kind of alluded to, it just kind of made sense to him from the outset that it was going to be such a suitable vehicle for telling this story of this character's journey through grief and handling those themes. So yeah, it was one of the kind of things he felt strongly about at the beginning
Yeah.
with that pitch.
I mean, obviously, a lot has been said about how it's quite a personal story for Abu. Was there
Sure.
nervousness surrounding that? Like, obviously, you're handling something that's very personal. Did you get kind of, did you get invested, get kind of nervous about it all?
Yeah, not the subject matter itself so much. Yeah, in a previous interview, I alluded to like having a somewhat similar experience losing my own dad. So I felt like
Oh,
I'd
sorry to hear it.
easily able to connect
Mm,
in terms of that. So I felt that there was stuff that I could easily understand from where he was coming from, and also bring stuff to the table with handling that side of the game. I think it always also served as such a strong motivational factor for us as well. That
for
it
sure.
wasn't just like, hey, I fancy doing this game, and I'm starting a studio, and well, okay, we all, do you want to come along for the ride? It was like, okay, no, this is yes, I want to do this game, but it's more than just a game,
Yeah.
right? It's a hugely important aspect to him and what his dad meant to him,
Mm,
and the relationship they had and his personal experience with going through grief, but also for how that could also help touch and support other people who who are going through that, who are yet to go through that potentially. So yeah, I think it was always more than nervousness. It was always kind of like a strong motivational factor. I think
for sure.
um, you always kind of want to come and do your best when coming to any project with a game and put out something that is well received and is to like a really good quality level. And I think that was just kind of like an extra motivational factor of delivering this game, really.
You mentioned before about being a fan of the Metroidvania genre, which obviously I am
Yeah.
as well. They're fantastic. Was there anything that kind of directly inspired it, or is it just the genre as a whole?
The genre as a whole, I mean, being developers, we're obviously avid gamers as well at the same point, and been playing these types of games for many, many years. And even Abu himself, I don't know where he finds the time a lot of the time, but he plays like absolutely everything. So there wasn't like one thing we were looking to kind of like jump off of. It was more the Metroidvania genre as a whole. And, it's been around for so many years, and there's got so many strong entries in the genre as well.
Mm,
There was a lot for us to kind of look to research and find not only just kind of what worked well, but also where's a space that we could carve an identity for ourselves within that genre, right? Like, okay, what is it that some of these maybe aren't doing, which we can kind of maybe push a little bit more on for ourselves to help with ZAU's identity, especially on a gameplay standpoint as well.
what would you say are some examples of that off the top of your head? Stuff that Tales of Kenzera does that other Metroidvanias have kind of avoided.
Yeah, so I think the big thing for us, we wanted to kind of one continue to push on a well. Let's first of all let's start with the masks element, right?
Yes, I
So
was going
we
to ask
wanted
about
to
them
kind of
later. Yeah.
yeah. So we kind of referred to the dance of the shaman, which is the switching between the two masks, and you know Metroidvanias typically have a strong kind of like core move set, right?
For sure.
And the masks enabled us to be able to kind of expand on that more for a single character, right? So we've got one character, but now the potential is doubled with these two masks, and they deliver two very different aspects, right? So one mask is also giving us almost like a shoot 'em up type of gameplay with like the ranged combat, and as long with like the crowd control capabilities on that. And then the other one is giving us this melee aspect, and then be able to have the interplay between the two. So really trying to be able to take the best of both those kind of concepts and merge them together in a way that both support and complement each other for a unified and cohesive experience. So that was something we really wanted to kind of push on more. Another aspect was we also wanted to kind of push. We've done, I think, really well on is pushing further, especially quite a considerably small team, is the engagement in terms of like the traversal obstacles as well.
Hmm.
Um, so not just the Metroidvania genre, but I think platformers in general, where kind of the level by level type platformers, they're very much kind of Twitch-based gameplay, a lot of
Hmm.
different obstacles, hazards, and everything, and we deliver a lot of variety in that aspect and merge that with this interconnected world. Um, so yeah, those are kind of elements that we really want to push on. And another aspect, I guess, especially with like the theme, is I think you know we really want to have something that has a strong emotional core, which I don't
Sure.
think many Metroidvanias do.
Not really, no.
The yeah, so. Delivering on that with like a really personable story for the character and really trying to tie the narrative into the gameplay and make them work in sync with each other so that you got this experience that is both mechanically engaging but also it's emotionally and thoughtfully engaging in terms of like the narrative that sits alongside it as well in the
Mm.
same way. Um, so yeah, I think that's a lot of what's kind
There's a
of
lot.
help us to yeah carve our sort of identity in that space.
Yeah. What? So with the two distinct gameplay styles, the sun and the moon, how
Yeah,
difficult was it to have two like basically completely different move sets? How was that working those together and being prepared for every kind of situation?
yeah, it's a big challenge. So the big first challenge was really trying to just line out and carve out the identities for both masks and make
Mhm.
sure that they were quite distinct from one another. So a lot of the early kind of trials and tribulations was in terms of like, okay, what is it that this mask's doing that the other one isn't, so that you're not just feeling like, oh, it doesn't really matter which mask I'm in because they both
Yeah.
work, right? That they can both work for a similar situation but used in different ways is the way to kind of like go about it for us. So that was like the kind of like the big aspect. There's also a sense of complexity with this as well because you've got that um, calling back to memory of like, okay, what moves are in the blue mask, what moves in the red mask, the switching between them dynamically. But I think it's an element that's allowed us to have a kind of good skill gap for like the novice player can kind of come in still be accessible that they can kind of switch between the masks very easily. It's a single button, it's very instant. If they mash a few buttons, they're getting a different response, and they can start to figure out the best use cases for each mask.
Mm.
But for the more experienced players and the expert players who kind of build up their skill, they'll hopefully be able to do things that a novice player wouldn't have even considered as they start to find out the different nuances with the masks and chaining and juggling between the different attacks,
Mm.
basically, and finding new possibilities that potentially that we haven't even tried and discovered.
Mm.
So yeah, that's a lot of the I guess challenges with developing the masks.
Yeah. It's interesting you mention accessibility because the Metroidvania genre is obviously I have played a lot of games, so for me it doesn't seem such a challenge, but
Yeah.
for a general audience, I've always heard that Metroidvanias are they're quite difficult. They're harder to get into. Where would you say Tales of Kenzera like lands on that scale? Would you say it's still quite accessible for newer players?
Yeah, we hope so. We really hope so. So from the outset, with the with the strong emotional theme that we had, and also the kind of like the stylings with like the Bantu inspiration,
Mm.
Abu certainly wanted to be able to kind of one the strong emotional core with the grief to be able to it to be something that a lot of people could experience and learn from and um, uh, to get something from it in that sense. But two, also to the point that Bantu mythology is not very well known um, around the world, is to be able to kind of expose that to more people, right? And if they want to dig into it more, they can kind of then branch off of like the little bits, end of the threads that we're giving them and be like, oh, okay, where did this come from? And do their own research and find out more about them. So we really wanted it to be a game that could be easily played by novice players as well as more experienced players. And I also hope that I think one of the strong points we had from the outset for that was the strong narrative.
Yeah, for sure.
It was something that even for novice players who might not be as engaged with the mechanical depth that's available, there's a strong motivational aspect through seeing out the narrative and seeing how that plays, and having this engaging protagonist, right, as they're going through.
Yeah.
So yeah, and in addition to that, a lot of play testing and kind of seeing where are those bumps in the difficulty spikes and how can we kind of smooth those out for the majority of people best we can. It's always a difficult aspect with any game, but just doing that kind of testing and an iteration loop, and going through and just trying to make sure we have something that feels smooth in terms of that difficulty ramping, so that we've prepared you for that next step of jumping up, right? And one last thing I guess I mentioned in that is that we have some stuff which is a harder challenge in the game, but it's often presented as optional content.
Oh, nice.
So what I kind of mentioned in the presentation was the combat trials, and there's the gauntlets as well, right? It's like, yeah, you can get rewards from those, but the player is never forced into having to do these more difficult challenges. They can have a go. If they, fail it a few times and feel like a little bit stuck, they can move on with the critical path and then come back at a later time if they so pleased to do. So yeah, we hope to serve that balance of, one, the novice players can kind of get through that critical path. Two, the more experienced players will still get a good challenge on that critical path, but then there's a little bit extra on the side in the optional content, which kind of pushes their skill set.
I mean, we've talked about the challenge for players, but as a gaming journalist, I cannot imagine how difficult it is to put together a Metroidvania, because in terms of the genre, they're so well known for being interconnected, and every mechanic building on one another until you kind of reach the final stage and be able to do everything. What was the most difficult challenge for you personally when developing a Metroidvania?
Yeah, I think, like as you say, it's building out that move set, right? Because it takes time to, one, kind of define what those moves are going to be and find what works for your game, and developing those mechanics to like a good quality level. But two, you've also got to build out a world where those mechanics are kind of represented in a kind of fairly sort of spread out way. It's not like you've got one level, okay, now this is ability 1 and 2, and then the next level is ability 3 and 4, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, if the player comes back to here, how does this later ability maybe have some use here, right? So you've got that thing of trying to build the whole world and also build up this full move set. But when you're building out the whole world, you maybe don't have the full move set ready and in place. So you're trying to predict a lot of bits and pieces and do the best you can to be like, okay, as you get that parity between the two, it's like, okay, is everything gelling? Is everything working together? And then trying to massage areas to kind of, make them work a little bit better. So it's a real balancing act between those core mechanics and the world building itself in terms of like the level design.
You mentioned about abilities as well. Obviously, a core part of Metroidvanias is slowly unlocking stuff. Can you reveal anything, like maybe your favourite thing you unlock later in the game?
Ooh, so we've got one of the mechanics which it enables you to kind of change the states on these platforms, and we don't do this with everything, but it has a different effect in the Mask of the Sun and the Mask of the Moon.
Right.
So in one mask, it kind of builds these platforms, and in the other mask, it kind of destroys them. So we use, well, it's not just platforms, it's sometimes barriers, but it really does get into these points where we start to push the player a little bit and where they're doing that little bit of juggling of like, oh, okay, I need to build this platform, jump on it, switch mask, but then destroy this barrier while I'm in midair, jumping and dashing through. And when the player gets it, it really gets them into this kind of like flow state where they feel like just operating on a different level, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, okay, switch, jump, switch, back, jump, pulse. So yeah, it's the ability called pulse. So yeah, have a look out for that one,
Yeah.
and some of the challenges that we set up for that.
Mm.
So yeah, one of my favorites.
You mentioned earlier as well about traversal, and I've played the demo. I've been keeping up with this since announcement, but actually traversal is something I know less about. So could you open me up on like how that progresses throughout the game?
Yeah. So I guess with like as you know, with Metroidvanias, not all of them, but there are a lot of good ones where the traversal was tied into like the gating
For sure.
abilities. So as you know, otherwise you it would kind of just be like unlock, you know, door type X, unlock door
Yeah.
type Y. But when it's combined into the traversal mechanics and how you can move around the world,
Mm.
it becomes satisfying on like another level. You're not just opening up the world, but you're also improving the ways that you can actually move around that world and explore it at the same time. So we have a lot of that kind of funneled in, and at times we also try to account for um, how can we either have traversal utility with these mechanics, but also like what combat utility
Yeah.
is there for these things. So, like in the demo, for example, you have the bamboo stone which freezes water, but you can also freeze enemies, right? So,
Right. Of course.
making sure we've got like this dual purpose with the mechanics, and we're getting efficient use out of them as well,
Mm.
right? So, it opens up new possibilities. So it's like, okay, I'm doing the same thing on the gamepad, but pressing the same button, but depending on the context that I'm using it in, it's giving me this different benefit. So, right, yes, I can do the traversal, whereas like in the bamboo stone case, freezing the water, or I can then use it for freezing enemies in combat and
Mm.
helping me there. So yeah, and in other cases where there's even maybe not like uh, a direct application, even with like the base movement set, a lot of the combat is movement based. Like as I said, like we have like these arenas where we really try to encourage and motivate players to move around the combat spaces,
Mm.
which requires them to use these traversal abilities. So they're not just using it to move around the world, but they're also using it to put themselves in more advantageous positions spatially within the combat environments. So I touched upon kind of like juggling earlier on, right? Where you can kind of launch into those things, you can double jump into like juggling. Um, you're then able to do dashing, launch someone, jump up with them with the strike, hit them a few times, dash through the other side of them, plummet down with like a ground pound strike, and continue your flow of your combat. So really kind of making sure that there's this cohesion
Mm.
between the traversal and the combat, so that they're both satisfying individually, but also together.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm so excited. I've been keeping an eye out for ages, and I just can't wait. That was actually my last question. I know we're nearing the end, but thank you so much for your time.
Oh
Um,
yeah, no problem. Yeah, it was great to meet you, George.
awesome.
Yeah,
And you.
take care.
Cool. You too.